And hi again, everybody. Welcome in to Warriors Live. This is Dan Devone. We have you for the next half hour as we get close to witching hour. And, of course, at the top of the hour, we hand things over to Tim Roy and Tom Tolbert for the call of Game 3 as the series now shifts from the Twin Cities back to the Bay Area as the Warriors split the 2 games in Minnesota. So you do what it is that you need to take care of, and now you come back for 2. The Warriors, what seems to be sort of the overall thinking in terms of optimism, in terms of giving the Warriors somewhat of a chance in what is obviously a team that is depleted and without their best player in Steph Curry, the overall thought process right now seems to be, once again, split. If you can get one of the 2 games and force this series potentially to a Game 6, then you have a puncher's chance because, and I am being very, very hopeful when I say this, and maybe overly optimistic, that Steph Curry potentially could come back for that Game 6, which would give him nearly 2 weeks off. So Game 6 would be played a week from tomorrow, next Sunday, and the Warriors would potentially have Steph Curry back. But that, again, a lot has to happen between now and then, and we'll get into Steph Curry's injury, but as of right now, the man isn't even putting up shots. He's receiving treatment. And I talked about this earlier today on Warriors Live, that after seeing Steph Curry, numerous press conferences involving injuries during the regular season as well as in the postseason, that it just seemed to me, and this is body language, this is me just reading into the guy, again, after seeing so many of these, that between the lines, I just felt as though he was resigned to the fact that he was not coming back in this series. Steph Curry did not at any point paint a picture of optimism that he potentially could get up some shots, that there is a good chance that he can come back, which he will often do. He'll intimate that there's a good chance he'll be back sooner rather than later. I don't think anybody that happened to see that, anybody that was part of the press pool that was there, walked away feeling as though Steph Curry was going to be back sooner rather than later, or even whether it's a Game 6 or Game 7, whether he's back for this series, I think, again, is being very, very optimistic and hopeful. So what is it that the Warriors have to do going forward after getting blown out and losing in Game 2, 117-93 was the final score? By the way, the Warriors' offensive rating in that contest, 97.9, which is just bad. It is not the worst, but it's right up there. It is offensive lack of productivity. It is an anemic offense that is clearly searching for somebody to score the basketball, not named Jimmy Butler. By the way, if you get into these sort of things, the worst offensive rating, and they weren't even keeping these sort of statistics back in the day, involved the Golden State Warriors in the playoff contest back in 1973 against that of the Los Angeles Lakers when they managed just 70 points to Kareem Abdul. I don't know, was that Wilt Chamberlain and company? So the Warriors don't have the distinction of having the worst offensive rating, but 97.9 is not good, and you would hope that that's not going to once again repeat itself tonight as the Warriors take on the Minnesota Timberwolves. Once again, Chase Center now is the location for Game 3. It's a good place to start here on Warriors Live. Let's just get right into it with the injury report. Today's injury report is brought to you by Boxer & Gerson, Northern California's premier workers' compensation law firm, helping injured workers get their lives back for over 40 years. More info, visit boxerlaw.com. And you know where I'm going with this. Steph Curry, of course, is out with that grade 1 left hamstring injury that he suffered 13 minutes into that first contest between the T-Wolves and the Warriors in the semifinals. Again, if you're looking at this with the glass half full, if you're one of those people, he could be back as soon as Game 6. But this is a day-to-day. There is absolutely no barometer on this. You cannot, and I'm sure Celebrini would be the first to tell you that when it comes to soft tissue injuries, that you just have no idea how the body's going to react. There's a good chance that when they reevaluate Steph Curry, just prior to Game 6 that they come back and say Steph is going to be out for another 2 more weeks. Not throwing water on this. I just think we have to live in sort of this reality instead of climbing into a bubble that Steph Curry is going to be back for Game 6. That would be ideal. But again, I just think that when you're talking about a hamstring injury, and especially for a player that's never suffered one, that this could be a lot longer than just this series. And should the Warriors be fortunate enough to get into the Western Conference Finals, it could carry beyond that as well. So again, the question now becomes, what do the Warriors do for offense going forward? Well, Jimmy Butler has got to be Jimmy Butler. That I think we can all agree on. Jimmy Butler needs to give you those 18 to 20 solid points. If he gives you 25, keep in mind, Jimmy Butler, as early as 2023, which was just 2 years ago, when, as people love to say, dragged the Miami Heat to the NBA Finals, eventually losing to the Denver Nuggets. In that first-round playoff matchup, he had a 56-point performance. So playoff Jimmy is a real thing. Jimmy Butler does it happen tonight? No idea. He could erupt for 40. He could have one of those huge games. Does he have it in his bag? Can he do it 2 years removed now on the wrong side of age 35? Certainly there is the potential. But Jimmy Butler has obviously the history of doing this in the postseason. But if I'm relying on Jimmy Butler to give me my 20 points, not turn the ball over, and be that Jimmy Butler, I will take that. The question now becomes, who's the other guy? And obviously there are a lot of candidates. Namely one Jonathan Kaminga, who had the 18 points and once again reared his head and reintroduced himself to Dub Nation and the rest of the NBA world as he was sort of the forgotten warrior at the end of the bench, getting DMP'd, going back to the play-in game. Actually going back prior to the play-in game and against the Los Angeles Clippers, if you recall, the last regular season game on that closing Sunday was sort of the indicator of things to come when he did not play. And now Jonathan Kaminga, whether it's out of desperation, simply because Steve Kerr needs somebody, and looks down the end of the bench and is like, all right, JK, what do you got? And Jonathan Kaminga responded. And he had 18 points. And I think if there's anything you can take away from post-game press conferences is what it is that Jonathan Kaminga had to say. And obviously, you know, how much you can read into these things, I'll leave that up to you. But, and I'm paraphrasing here, he essentially said that his confidence was back. And that's what you want to hear, because I think that more than anything, when we've seen brief glimpses of Jonathan Kaminga here in the postseason, and he's had his opportunities where Steve Kerr has turned to him, he's in his own head, and it was a player that lacked confidence. We know he has the raw ability. We know he can do this. We saw him at times carry this team throughout the season and be a prolific scorer before the arrival of Jimmy Butler. So we know the ability is there. It's just, I think he's in his own head. I think he's aware that at least he was at one point on a short leash. I think that whether there's any validity to it or not, he's very, very aware of he doesn't play with Jimmy Butler, or the two cannot coexist, which I don't put a lot of weight into. I think good players can always, especially when it comes to Jimmy Butler, they can always share the rock and they can be able to coexist. It's just a matter of Jonathan Kaminga and somebody letting him play through his mistakes. Fortunately or unfortunately, because it comes at the expense of one Steph Curry, Jonathan Kaminga got that opportunity and he responded with the 18 points. Now keep in mind, it was in a losing effort, but at one point in that second half, midway in the third quarter, it was Jonathan Kaminga that scored a bucket. Buddy Hield came down, gets a three. Suddenly you're within 7. The momentum swings, and you have this feel as though here come the Golden State Warriors. And I point that out because there was every opportunity for the Warriors just to pack it up and go away. And just, I think that was, when you look at that game in retrospect, it almost appeared as though it was somewhat of a tryout, that Steve Kerr was conceding the contest and just throwing everybody out there. Literally 14 players in the first half saw the floor. And it was almost as if he's just like, all right, listen, we're not going to win, but let's just get out here. And this is basically a live scrimmage. Let's find out what combinations work, who's ready to play, who can play with who. Earn minutes now for Game 3. And I think two guys raised their hand or at least stepped to the forefront. Namely, it was Jonathan Kaminga and the other being Trayce Jackson-Davis. I think Trayce Jackson-Davis was very similar to the player we saw that burst onto the scene as a rookie a year ago. Trayce Jackson-Davis, let's not forget, was the guy that started at the end of last season in the play-in game against Sacramento and then started in the first game of the 82 in opening night for the Warriors this year. He was thought of as the center of the future. But he played his way out of the rotation, primarily because he could not finish around the rim. And now Trayce Jackson-Davis is, again, much like that of Jonathan Kaminga, appears to be playing with some sort of confidence. And I think the addition of Trayce Jackson-Davis, I'm hoping to see him start tonight. Trayce Jackson-Davis gives you that athleticism that you're looking for. And along with Jonathan Kaminga, now to go along with Jimmy Butler, now you have three players that are giving you a presence on the interior. Aside from it's just Jimmy Butler and then everybody else just hanging out three-point line extended. That's sort of the Warriors right now. It's Jimmy Butler who can get to the paint and do some damage, and then nobody else. With Jonathan Kaminga, he's going to give you an opportunity to get to the rim. He puts pressure on the rim. This is what he does. And usually it results in one of three things. If he's out of control, he's going to run over who's ever in front of him. He could lose the ball. If he's out of control, lacking confidence, Jonathan Kaminga, it oftentimes is not a good thing. However, when Jonathan Kaminga has it cooking and he has that confidence, JK can get to the rim and he can score. He'll dunk on people. He'll finish with that left hand. He'll finish with either hand. And Jonathan Kaminga can also get to the free throw line. I think that when Jonathan Kaminga, and we saw some maturity and for him coming into his own, which was why that injury was so unfortunate because he was just putting it together. One of the indicators for me that Jonathan Kaminga is on track is him going to the free throw line frequently. And that's what he was doing. And so having Jonathan Kaminga and somebody, again, that can get to the paint, along with Trayce Jackson-Davis, another guy that can play in the paint, although very different than that of Jonathan Kaminga. You're not going to ISO Trayce Jackson-Davis 25 feet from the hoop and just let him take his man to the rim. No, but he's in the dunker spot. He has the ability to follow and to finish in the paint and picking up junk and garbage and offensive rebounds. He's springy. And not only that, but he'll run the floor with you. Like if you're out on a break, Trayce Jackson-Davis will fill, he'll fill one of the wings. He'll fill one of those spots where he's running alongside and he can finish. And he gets out and he runs. And that athleticism is very, very apparent when he's in the game. The other reason why I think it's so vital for the Golden State Warriors to get into the paint is that opens up everything else on the perimeter. I've always maintained, and I know Buddy Hield has been very good. You're not here if it's not for Buddy Hield's performance in Game 7 against the Houston Rockets at Houston. But Buddy Hield is a role player. If Buddy Hield was able to give you those 25 to 30 points consistently, he would not be a role player. He'd be a number one or two option on either this team or another team, and he'd be making upwards to $35 to $40 to $45 million a year. There's a reason why these guys are tabbed role players. It means that they can do it, but they can't do it every night. They do it infrequently. And that's who Buddy Hield is. And so if the Warriors can rely on somebody like that of Jonathan Kaminga to give you big numbers offensively, and then it becomes sort of that collaborative effort, whether it's Buddy Hield one night or whether it's Podziemski one night, Moses Moody, I'll get into. I'm not putting a lot of faith into where he's at right now. Could you talk about confidence? I think his is absolutely shot. GP2 won a game for you in that Houston series. Quentin Post, could he come back from the dead and give you some threes? That's what has to take place for the Warriors. I don't know that there's a recipe where we can say, okay, Butler, I feel good about Butler and his numbers are pretty solid. But I'm not willing to say, well, Draymond Green's going to give me 4 threes and a half, or Podziemski is going to return to being Podziemski as he was towards the latter part of the season, or that Moses Moody's going to get out of this funk and return to being an offensive threat. None of that gives me any sense of security. What I do think is more plausible is that collectively, all of these players can share that wealth, and that it can be a different player every night from here on out that steps up and gives you some big minutes. And more importantly, and specifically as it relates to the Warriors right now without Steph Curry, that one player that can score the basketball. A reminder, Warriors Live is presented by Xfinity. Stream sports from the best seat in the house with Xfinity. The out-of-town game of the night, out-of-town NBA game of the night, sponsored by San Francisco International Airport. Wherever your team goes, you can get there from SFO. SFO can get you to any city where any NBA action is going on. And this is very apropos because, Grandy, my man, I will indeed be on a flight to Newark, New Jersey, departing tomorrow at 6 a.m., and I will be at the Garden for tip-off on Monday. As the Boston Celtics out-of-town NBA game of the night, thank you very much. The Celtics take it to the New York Knicks. That series now 2-1. Neither team, by the way, has been able to win on their home floor. The Knicks beat the Celtics in the first 2 games of the season on the parquet out there in Beantown. And now the Boston Celtics, they return the favor out at the Mecca and the Garden at Penn Station in Midtown Manhattan as the Celtics win it 115-93. Once again, Game 4 will be played on Monday again in New York. And if you want to get there, as I will be doing, as I head tomorrow morning, the car picking me up at 4 a.m. to go to SFO. Of course, my destination will be to New York City for a Game 4. All right. Getting back to the Golden State Warriors, I talked about attacking the paint. It's because they have not been able to do that. They didn't do that at times throughout that series against Houston. I think there's a lot of staying out on the perimeter and the inability to take somebody off the dribble. I think Brandon Podziemski is somebody that dribbles deep into the clock and then is just looking to hand off. And there's nobody that is making a definitive move to the hoop. And the reason why that's important, especially for the Warriors, is that teams are aware of this. You saw this with Houston, and you'll see more of this with Minnesota, that they're just simply going to blitz whoever's crossing the timeline with the basketball. They're going to dare anybody to beat them off the dribble because the Warriors have not proven, whether it's Moody, whether it's Podziemski, whether it's Draymond Green, whether it's GP2, none of these players are getting to the paint. And that's, again, why I think it's so vital to have Jonathan Kaminga be a part, and I mean getting serious minutes tonight and in that rotation for Steve Kerr. Getting in the paint is really the difference for the Golden State Warriors. If there's a reason for Minnesota to collapse or to help out, well, there's your kick-out opportunities. Now you have an opportunity to kick to Buddy Hield. And Buddy Hield, there is 2 entirely different basketball players. One is Buddy Hield, who is covered trying to create his shot, who I don't think is very effective. And then there's the Buddy Hield, where if he has a crease or Buddy Hield has at least a good look at the rim, Buddy Hield will carve you up. And that's the Buddy Hield that the Warriors have to once again bring out tonight. And I think a lot of that is predicated on the Warriors' ability to get back to the paint. And that's something that they have really, really struggled with. I'm going to bring you in for this one simply because, Granny, I don't do this. Unless, of course, you're going to make me. But it's time for the Take It to the Bank prediction. That's right. It's time for Take It to the Bank prediction, brought to you by Fremont Bank. Full-service banking, no compromises. Now, the Warriors, believe it or not, are favorites tonight. So Vegas believes that the Warriors, without Steph Curry, can make a game of it, being favored by some 5 points, giving up 5 to that of the Minnesota Timberwolves.
I see it the other way around. Minnesota's favored by 6.
Is Minnesota?
Yeah, that's what I see.
I just saw Minnesota +6.
Well, look, according to FanDuel, Minnesota's favored by 6.
Wow.
Which makes sense.
Wait, +6. Yeah, they're getting the points.
The Warriors are getting the points. The Warriors are +6. Minnesota's -6.
Yeah, all right. Okay. Well, I just saw that. I'm glad I brought you in. All right, so who do you like tonight? Warriors, once again, 6-point underdogs.
You don't want to make a prediction yourself?
I don't do that sort of stuff. You know that, Granny.
I'll go with Pajemski to score 12 or more points.
Wow.
I think they need it.
Well, I'm glad you brought that up because we could talk a little Brandon Pajemski. Moses Moody, to me, has played his way out of the rotation. If Jonathan Kaminga can play his way out of the rotation, I think that it's only fair to say that this version of Moses Moody, again, let's be very clear, it's not an indictment on this man going forward. I just think for the here and now, for this game, maybe for this series, I am not running Moses Moody out there any longer. I just can't. I can't afford to. And this is what happens to younger players, is that younger players, sometimes the lights are too bright and the stage is too big. I think you're seeing that with OKC, who people thought were just going to cruise to the NBA Finals. And I think you're seeing that to a lesser degree with that of the Cleveland Cavaliers, another young basketball team. And we saw it certainly with the Houston Rockets. And I think Moses Moody is a guy right now that you just cannot rely on. And you could say, well, listen, I can't compromise that much on the defensive side because defensively is where you've cut your teeth. That's really been sort of the identity of the Warriors and the reason for, if you were to point a finger as to why the Warriors are where they are tonight and in the second round of the Western Conference playoffs and the turnaround since Jimmy Butler's arrival, well, it's been the defense, clearly. And statistically, it's supported. They've been the number one defense in the NBA. But that's the balancing act I think Steve Kerr finds himself right now. It's like, I need to continue to play defense. I understand that. But at what expense? Because I now have, there's a higher level of importance for me to score the basketball. So while Jonathan Kaminga may not be your first choice defensively, he has to play. Because I think scoring the basketball right now outweighs the defensive necessities, especially because you still have Draymond, who ideally and theoretically can help when Jonathan Kaminga, and you still have, obviously, Jimmy Butler, one of the best to ever do it. But you need scoring right now for the Golden State Warriors. And Moses Moody, and I'll take it a step further, while he's good defensively, he hasn't been very good defensively in this series. So I can't play Moses Moody, but it leads me to Brandon Pajemski, because to me, Brandon Pajemski is not much further behind. Pajemski is another guy that right now, he just looks like this moment as we go deeper into the playoffs, something he's never done in his second season in the NBA. Looks like it might be a little bit too much for him. And he is not looking at the rim. I don't know what happened to his float game. I talked about getting to the rim, puncturing that defense. That used to be part of his offensive bag, is that he had the ability for that little runner in the lane, that little teardrop that every point guard has, the deceleration when he had a guy on his back, the multiple awkward pump fakes all in the paint. That's all gone away. And you need that part of Pajemski's game to return. But the reason why I'm more comfortable benching Moses Moody as opposed to Brandon Pajemski is because Moody is not giving me as much as what it is that Brandon Pajemski always gives me on the defensive side. Always giving me the charges and the turnovers as a key member of the Golden State Warriors going forward. So Brandon Pajemski, if he can, they always talk about how role players are much better at home. We'll see if that holds true. He had a huge game against Houston in a home contest in the previous series. Can that Brandon Pajemski return? Well, we'll have to wait and see. But I'm not comfortable having to rely on Pajemski. I can't necessarily rely on the likes of, Draymond Green, GP2. I do feel comfortable, however, relying on Jonathan Kaminga. That's the X factor to me coming into the contest. Of course, we'll see you afterwards with the post-game show. A reminder, Warriors Live is presented by Xfinity. Stream sports from the best seat in the house with Xfinity. We'll see you after the game. Time now for Tim Roy and Tom Tolbert in Game 3. So long, everybody.